Welcome to section 10.4 in the Miller Living in the Environment textbook. This section deals with how we should manage and sustain our natural parks and our natural reserves. But real quick, I just want to differentiate, make sure you remember the difference between natural parks and our park systems versus our forests. Our forests are run by the Department of Agriculture. And so just remember that from the first week of school, how we talked about the Department of Agriculture uses the national forests in a means to protect them, so for future use, and so we can actually use them for logging and as a resource. So the Department of Agriculture is trying to preserve the forests for future use, but the natural parks are going to be more what we use for preservation and the low impact kind of stuff. Okay, welcome to chapter 10.4 from Miller, Living in the Environment. So we want to discuss real quickly how we should manage and sustain natural parks and natural reserves. Just a real quick refresher, your natural parks are not run by the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture runs the national forest. Remember we talked about the forest at the beginning of the school year being a commodity, and Gifford Pinchot, he was the first one to be in charge of the Forestry Service. And the whole purpose of the national forests are to be protected so that they have sustainable use and future resource use for others. Whereas your national parks and reserves are going to be more preservation oriented, and this is so you can have more low impact hiking, etc., etc. So the concept here is that we need to sustain biodiversity, and it's going to require more effective protection of the existing parks and reserves, as well as protection of much more of the Earth's remaining undisturbed land area. So the national parks have many threats. There are worldwide about, this number may have changed by now, this was printed in 2007, but 1,100 major national parks, and these are basically found in more than 120 countries. The thing about the parks in the developing countries, this is where you're going to have majority of the biodiversity. A lot of our hot spots are going to be in the developing countries, but they are only 1% protected against illegal animal poaching, illegal logging and mining, and those that where it is illegal probably aren't going to have a lot of personnel and money and etc. in order to actually be able to fight the invasions and the persecution of the animals that are illegally poached. So, and also if you're in an area, if you are basically fighting for your survival, you're probably not going to care so much about that species if it's endangered or whatnot, because you are needing wood to burn. You need that cropland. You need to cut down those forests so you have cropland because you think it is better soil so you can actually grow some food. And you need to shoot the animals to eat, etc. So basically, they need daily survival. So they're probably not going to care as much about the law, and especially if they can get a lot of money. If you can sell items such as the rhino horns, remember your western rhinos are severely endangered, your western African rhinos, I should say. Then the elephant tusks and furs, etc., are poached so that they can be sold. So it's pretty sad. So there are 58 major national parks in the United States. Now, actually, there's 59 major national parks, not 58 anymore. But I want to throw these pictures up here to show you. And one of them in particular that we visit often on our side of town would be the Great Smoky Mountains. And the Great Smokies actually have the highest traffic of all 59 national parks in the United States. They have about 9 million visitors a year. And a lot of them are going to this one cool place called LeConte, and the only way to get there is by hike. I forgot the mileage. I want to say it's about a 5-mile hike in. The only way to get there is by foot. But what's really cool about the Smokies is it's got about 70 miles of the AT cuts through the Smoky Mountains. Problem with the Smokies though is that during the summertime you're going to have a lot of traffic, a lot of pollution, a lot of noise, etc. It did in the fall you're going to have the leaves changing, so a lot of people like to go up there for that as well. And there's going to be obviously issues when you have a lot of pollution from the dirt bikes and dune buggies and all those kind of crazy things that your national parks are getting now. And remember, national parks, we're trying to keep them preserved, and less of the conservation and more of the preservation. Stresses damage from non-native species such as boars and mountain goats. As a matter of fact, the Great Smoky Mountains, they've been suffering, the hemlocks have been suffering for quite a while. We had they call it the woolly, like a hemlock woolly adiglade, I can't really say it. That came in from Japan, and that's been decimating all the hemlocks in the Smoky Mountains. And as a matter of fact, really through most of the Appalachian Trail, through the Appalachian Mountains. But the boars and the mountain goats, those have been kind of
they've been introduced to North Carolina. Those were also part of the Great Smoky Mountains are being threatened, the vegetation part anyway. The mountain goats are from, they have actually been invading Washington State's Olympic National Park. They trample native vegetation also, and that impacts soil erosion. The non-native species also can come in because of your vehicle tires, and you come in and you have hiking gear that maybe you use at another park, and you then go camping and hiking at this other new park, then you're going to bring in some foreign, critters and whatnot. Native species are sometimes killed or removed, and of course, we will talk about that when we talk about the gray wolves of Yellowstone. We've talked about that quite a bit already, and we're going to touch on it one more time. But these national parks end up being like threatened island of biodiversity. They are sitting in a sea of usually surrounded by different cities and sitting in a sea of pollution, especially Great Smokies. They are impacted by Atlanta. They have smog alerts in Tennessee and North Carolina for the Great Smoky Mountains all the time. A lot of the different tree species at the top of the Great Smokies are being impacted. There's kind of different zones of the Smokies, and the one particular zone is like a spruce fir forest, and the spruce fir forest has been impacted quite a bit by the smog. And let's see, they need billions in trail and infrastructure repairs. So even though we're thinking, wow, cool, 9 million people to Great Smokies, that's a lot of money in tourism dollars being brought. But it's not nearly what they charge for car entrances to these parks is not nearly enough what they need to restore the trails. That's why they also really rely a lot on volunteers. And they need volunteers to go back and help cut through the trails and trim trees when they fall and help maintain areas so that you don't have erosion. Sometimes you gotta build the banks back up. Grand Teton National Park. Unfortunately, this was made and it does not have for my choice, of course, I'd have Mount Rainier, which is an active stratovolcano in Washington State. Grand Teton's in Wyoming. I haven't actually been here, but they're beautiful. It's on my bucket list. I want to go there. But Mount Rainier, of course, is gorgeous. Another one of the national parks. Think about how many national parks have you been to? There are, like I said, 59. If you've been to Grand Canyon's one, the Joshua Tree one, that's really cool. Mount Lassen, I used to live in, Chico, California, and we used to go frolic on Mount Lassen National Forest. That's where I went to go catch those kangaroo rats I was telling y'all about, was on Mount Lassen. It's one of the national parks. Oh, yeah, probably important to know that the national park system is run by the U.S. Department of Interior. And remember, the first national park was established by Ulysses S. Grant. Do you remember what it is? Good job. You're right. It was Yellowstone in 1872, I believe. What do we have here? Okay, so some stresses on the, wow, I feel like we already said that. Did I go the right way? Aha, I did not. Let me do this. There we go. This is some natural capital degradation damage from off-road vehicles. You can tell this is actually near the city of Moab, Utah. Basically, you had off-road vehicles, which are polluting the air, damaging soils and vegetation, threatening wildlife, and degrading wetlands and streams. Here are some solutions for national parks. You can integrate plans for managing parks in nearby federal lands, add new parkland near threatened parks, buy private land, locate visitor parking outside parks, and perhaps provide shuttles, especially for the Smokies since they're completely traffic ridden. Increase federal funds for park maintenance, raise entry fees, and that might actually help with the trail maintenance and management. Seek private donations, which I know they do. Limit the number of visitors, increase the number of park rangers. Poor park rangers, they're spending so much time trying to keep people off of keeping people off of the illegal parts. Sometimes you shut down trail areas in order to let them restore and try to get back to their natural vegetative state. And so I'm not gonna lie, I've actually interacted with the park ranger when I was told to not go a certain way on a trail. I had to go a different way. But they're doing that. I understand. They're trying to do that to make sure they can try to restore some areas when they get trampled. Okay, now we have the science focus, the reintroducing the gray wolf to Yellowstone. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because you've already seen the documentary and you've already done the case study reading, so I'm just reiterating, I guess, what you already read. But this has to do with the gray wolf. They are the most widely studied wild animal. They're the greatest
study wild animal basically because of their success. They are a success story, especially in the minds of those who wanted to increase their population back. But they're important because we probably didn't realize how much of the ecosystem was impacted by their absence. And then when they came back, we were able to see how much it did actually impact that ecosystem and how the native vegetation, when it came back, what doesn't say on the slide, it talks also in your book about how the native songbirds came back and that population was restored. So there's a trickle-down effect by having the gray wolves reintroduced. Then, of course, there's controversy behind that, and the farmers and ranchers who wanted to not have them come back, and then the fact that they're now off the endangered species list, and now the conservationists are upset about that because they think they should still be protected because when they accidentally leave the park, which they will, they'll get hunted and shot. But anyway, we'll talk more about that. There's the gray wolf. Of course, remember the documentary also talked about the Great Pyrenees and the cute little doggy that was sometimes attacked by the packs of wolves. But anyway, nature reserves only occupy a small part of the Earth's land. Less than 13% is protected. Conservationists think that you should have 20% at least, that these areas, the best way to protect biodiversity is to create more of these wildlife refuges, etc., for them. And there needs to be cooperations between businesses and governments and conservation groups, concerned individuals, private groups, and basically this funding has to be done from bottom-up political pressure by the concerned parties involved. The Nature Conservancy is a really cool organization because it was created by a group of scientists, by professional ecologists in 1951, and they've done a great job worldwide creating, purchasing private land or to create natural wildlife sanctuaries. A lot of eco-philanthropists use their wealth to buy up wilderness areas in South America. And the state of Georgia, actually, we have one of the most protected coastlines, second only to Alaska in the United States, for conservation efforts and preserving a lot of wildlife refuges. And of course, this was statistics that I heard from Skidway while we were down there. So hopefully that's true. But we have like Wausau's uninhabited island, Cumberland Island, we have Sapelo. So Georgia does a pretty good job. And the land trust groups are nonprofit organizations in the United States, and they pool financial resources together to get tax deductions or deductible donations in order to also buy up some private land. And this is Silver Creek Nature Conservancy, preserved near Sun Valley, Idaho. When it comes to large versus small reserves, it almost seems intuitive that it will be a larger reserve that will be most beneficial. But honestly, it turns out what the research biologists did, conservation biologists, that it matters on the type of ecosystem that you're actually researching. Turns out with Amazon, it had a lot of fragmentation, but they showed that certain habitats would do better if they had more medium sized in different places and in different spots versus one ginormous reserve. So just kind of you have to consider what the ecosystem it is really. But they do have a buffer zone concept. And what basically this is saying that there's like an inner core of reserve that's very limited in human traffic. And the local people can extract resources without harming that inner core because there's basically buffer zones. There's two different buffer zones. Buffer zone 1 is also pretty limited, and then buffer zone 2 is where they actually have more opportunity to do some logging and whatever it is they need from the forest. The United Nations has 553 buffer zones in 107 countries now. But the problem is that we need more, and of course, there's little funding to keep these protected and managed properly. So another solution is a habitat corridor, and basically what that is it's another protected area that attaches different reserves together. And what's cool is it allows for migration of vertebrates that need the large ranges, but you only have room for the medium ones. And they permit the migration of individuals and populations. So if one reserve deteriorates, you can now move to another one, and they support animals that have to actually have seasonal migrations for food, and they enable species to shift ranges if you have global climate change situations. But the flip side, you can threaten isolated populations because now pest species can move in. So in other words, invasive species now have an opportunity to move over. Now you have disease, fire, and invasive species between reserves, and you expose some of the migrating species to natural predators, human hunters, and pollution because these corridors are now they're basically less protected, and animals can now travel on these corridors. And next, we're going to take a look at Costa Rica, which has been a global conservation leader and a success story.